Thank you very much. Bon après-midi, everyone. As Hurricane Fiona has now passed through our region, we are seeing all sorts of evidence of the devastation that our Atlantic provinces in eastern Quebec have experienced. And after several intense days of preparation and response, we are now moving from a posture of response to one of recovery. We all know that this recovery will take time, and there are significant challenges, but I want to take this opportunity to assure all Canadians that the federal government is coordinated across all departments, agencies, and ministries, and we are united in our resolve to be there for the people and communities that have been impacted and to work in close collaboration with our provincial and municipal partners. Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced that we have approved a request for federal assistance for the government of Nova Scotia. Reconnaissance operations have been taking place, and Minister Anand will have more to share on this work. Prince Edward Island continues to experience effects such as localized coastal flooding, downed trees and disruption to roadways, impacts to critical infrastructure, and over half of the population is still without power. And as Minister Macaulay and I announced earlier this afternoon, we have approved the request for federal assistance from the government of Prince Edward Island. The Canadian Armed Forces will be deployed to assist in the clearing of roadways and flooded debris, and while technicians work to restore power grid, we'll be there to assist them. I can also share that we have received and approved this afternoon a request for federal assistance from the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. The Canadian Armed Forces and Transport Canada assets will be deployed to conduct aerial imagery and assessments so that we can get a better sense of the damage that has been experienced in the province. Canadian Armed Forces personnel will also conduct physical impact assessments and support the local authorities in their efforts to ensure the well-being of affected residents. In a disaster like this one, the one that we are experiencing, time is of the essence and a speedy response is what's required. And we have been able to move quickly because of the extensive planning and positioning resources that began early last week in close collaboration with the provinces. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank my provincial counterparts for their close and continuing collaboration, and to all my parliamentary colleagues for their advocacy on behalf of the constituents in their impacted regions. I'd also like, if I may, to take one last moment to mention our matching fund with the Canadian Red Cross. As Canadians, we have a long and proud history of supporting each other through our moments of greatest challenge. The Canadian Red Cross delivers a range of emergency services to those in need, and your donations can help to provide interim housing, clothing, food, and other essential supplies to those who are needing our help right now. You can donate online at www.redcross.ca by calling 1-800-418-1111 or by texting Fiona to 20222 to make a $10 donation. Thank you all very much. Merci beaucoup. And I'd now turn it over to my colleague, Minister LeBlanc.
Alors, bonjour, good afternoon. This morning, as he did yesterday, the Prime Minister convened a meeting of the Incident Response Group, which I attended along with several of my colleagues present with us today. Senior officials from the Canadian Armed Forces, Transport Canada, Public Safety Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Fisheries and Oceans, as well as the Canadian Coast Guard, updated us on the situation in Atlantic Canada and Eastern Quebec in the aftermath of Hurricane Fiona. Le Premier ministre a parlé à ses homologues des provinces de l'Atlantique et du Québec et avec de nombreux députés des régions touchées. J'ai moi-même eu de nombreux échanges avec les premiers ministres de l'Atlantique et mon homologue québécoise, ainsi que plusieurs de mes collègues parlementaires aussi. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, the Government of Canada stands ready to assist provinces in the cleanup and recovery efforts that will take place over the coming days and weeks. Nous serons là pour aider les communautés touchées par cette puissante tempête à se relever. Nous savons que plusieurs familles ont été fortement ébranlées par les dommages causés par Fiona. Au cours des prochaines semaines, nous travaillerons en collaboration avec nos homologues provinciaux pour les aider à retrouver un semblant de normalité le plus rapidement possible. Hier, le Premier ministre a annoncé que nous avons approuvé une demande d'aide fédérale en provenance du gouvernement de la Nouvelle-Écosse. De plus, tel que annoncé aujourd'hui par mes collègues les ministres McCauley et Blair, nous avons aussi approuvé une demande d'aide fédérale de la part du gouvernement de l'île du Prince-Édouard. Et nous venons aussi tout juste d'approuver une autre demande d'aide de la part du gouvernement de Terre-Neuve et du Labrador. Les forces armées canadiennes seront déployées pour aider à dégager les routes, à nettoyer les débris laissés derrière par les inondations et aussi permettre aux monteurs de ligne de faire leur travail et de remettre le réseau électrique en état. Lors de crises comme celle que nous vivons présentement, chaque minute compte et nous avons été en mesure de poser des gestes rapidement grâce, comme le ministre Blair a bien dit, grâce à la planification et le prépositionnement de ressources humaines et de matériel qui a débuté la semaine dernière. Je vais conclure en mentionnant le fonds de la Croix-Rouge canadienne. Vous pouvez venir en aide aux sinistrés en faisant un don en ligne au www.croixrouge.ca, par téléphone au 1-800-418-1111 ou en textant Fiona au 20-22-2 pour faire un don de 10 $. Le gouvernement fédéral égalera tous les dons reçus par le Croix-Rouge. Et avec ça, je vous remercie et je passe maintenant la parole à ma collègue, la ministre Anita Anand. So, Anita, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Dom. I want to start off, of course, by expressing my deep concern and sympathies to everyone in Atlantic Canada and Eastern Quebec who is dealing with the devastating effects of Hurricane Fiona. Homes have been destroyed and swept away. Communities have been isolated and thousands of people are without power. And I am thinking of everyone in affected communities, including in my home province of Nova Scotia. Let's start off by discussing CAF support. À toutes les personnes touchées, l'aide est en route et nos forces armées canadiennes relèvent le défi pour vous soutenir. The Canadian Armed Forces are providing assistance from the Immediate Response Unit from 5 Canadian Division in Gagetown, New Brunswick, and the activation of reserves in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and P.E.I. And I will now provide you with an update on our response province by province. Nova Scotia. In Nova Scotia, as of 8 o'clock this morning, a Canadian Army reconnaissance team from the 5th Canadian Division was on the ground in Cape Breton working with provincial authorities to evaluate the damage and to identify what military capabilities, including equipment and personnel, can best assist. 3 platoons are available to assist the province, and most personnel are already at work today. Nous fournirons de l'équipement et du personnel pour aider à rétablir l'électricité, les routes et les ponts là où les autorités civiles de la province ont besoin de notre aide. Nous sommes également prêts à fournir des images aériennes afin que la province puisse évaluer le soutien supplémentaire nécessaire dans les zones qui ne sont pas accessibles en raison de la tempête. Prince Edward Island. Today, we also received and approved a request for assistance from Prince Edward Island for the removal of trees and debris from roadways to assist the restoration of the power grid. And in order to undertake these tasks, the Canadian Armed Forces will be there with 3 platoons available to deploy. Moving on to Newfoundland and Labrador. We just received and approved a request for assistance from the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. We've engaged Canadian Rangers to assess the situation in Western Newfoundland, and 3 platoons are available to assist the province. So in other words, to recap, we have approximately 100 personnel per province available to assist in Nova Scotia, in Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. This can rapidly fluctuate if and when additional tasks are determined by the province, and the Canadian Armed Forces stand ready to pull more troops forward that are currently on heightened readiness at the current time. Moving on to Quebec, enfin, aux îles de la Madeleine, les Rangers canadiens restent nos yeux et nos oreilles sur le terrain et continuent de nous fournir des informations à jour afin que nous restions prêts à aider la province si on nous le demande. Et avant de conclure, un mot sur notre autre capacité. The Air Force. The Air Force is establishing an air task force in Gagetown and has placed CH-146, CH-147, CH-148, CC-130, and CP-140 aircraft on high readiness to move. In particular, CP-148 Cyclones and CP-140s are already in Nova Scotia and ready to assist if needed. Following the hurricane, search and rescue operations have resumed normal posture in the region and have conducted operations post-storm. The Navy has a ready-duty ship and small vessels in Halifax, and HMCS Margaret Brooke and HMCS Goose Bay are in St. John's. In fact, HMCS Margaret Brooke will soon commence initial movements towards Western Newfoundland should support to Western Newfoundland or les îles de la Madeleine be requested. If needs are greater, we will continue to augment our presence from adjacent areas. So let me close by saying that federal assistance is going to continue to be assessed on a daily basis. And this remains an all-hands-on-deck effort. The safety and security of Canadians is our top priority, and with the Canadian Armed Forces, we will continue to do whatever it takes to keep Canadians safe. Le ministère de la Défense nationale et les forces armées canadiennes vont continuer de travailler avec les organismes provinciaux et fédéraux pour déterminer la meilleure façon dont nous pouvons contribuer. Our Canadian Armed Forces always stand ready to support Canadians. Together, we will get through this. Thank you. Merci, miigwech. And I'll now pass it over to Minister Fraser.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, colleagues. What we've seen on the ground over the last couple of days is unlike anything I've experienced in my own community in Nova Scotia. Thankfully, reports in Nova Scotia of serious injuries are minimal. We really want to say thank you to the Canadian Hurricane Centre for the early warning system, and most importantly to Nova Scotians for taking seriously the advice around emergency preparedness. The level of collaboration between levels of government and amongst colleagues has been stellar to keep the flow of information going. I'd encourage everyone to continue to listen to anyone who's sharing information from Environment Canada about what you should expect. But I got to tell you, things on the ground at home are pretty rough in northern Nova Scotia and through Cape Breton. The experience trying to get you through your community is near impossible depending on where you live. It's hard to drive a couple of blocks without finding debris that's blocking your path. We continue to see power crews out trying to remedy the situation, but on every street corner, you are seeing large trees taken down into the power lines. Connectivity remains somewhat challenging, but I thank everyone who's working to ensure we're still able to communicate with one another. I've got some real concerns about the impact of the severe weather event we've experienced over the last few days. on the fishery, our harbor infrastructure in particular, and some of the farms in our communities who are reporting lost crops and cornfields and damage to farm buildings and equipment. But through all this difficulty, I have to say the spirit of Nova Scotians are really showing us what they're made of. In response to difficulties, continuing power outages, we've got neighbors who are cooking whatever they've had in the freezer on the barbecue, who those who have a generator are offering to their neighbors to come over for a cup of coffee or to plug their phones in so they can stay in touch. We've had a real scare in my own community with a young boy who was reported missing, with many people showing up and thankfully finding him safe from harm. Folks, when you grow up on salt water, you learn how to weather some pretty cruel storms. But I can tell you, I've never been so impressed to count my neighbors amongst my friends. We're going to continue to be there as a federal government to help people support people through the recovery, and very happy to continue to have the support of the federal government. Happy to pass it over to my colleague, Minister Hutchings, for a view of the ground in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, colleagues. Friends, it is devastating in Western Newfoundland and Southwest Newfoundland. As we've all said, Hurricane Fiona has touched down with just a vengeance. Sadly, there is a woman in Port of Ask who has been washed out to sea. I know we're very hopeful. Coast Guard is engaged, and we're very hopeful that she can be found. So our thoughts and prayers are with Port of Ask and the family at this time. I know everyone is working 100% to make sure that we have a good outcome there. So Coast Guard does have one helicopter on the ground. There's another one en route, and it's probably there by now. Good news, Marine Atlantic, the way the seas died down magically. So Mother Nature does have a good soul some days. The seas have died down, and Marine Atlantic started off midday today with 2 crossings to deal with the backlog, and they'll be back on normal schedule soon. I've been in touch with all my local mayors. I've been chatting with the Premier. I believe he's coming to the area tomorrow. Port of Ask has a few hundred people still displaced from their homes being washed away. The number is growing of the homes that have been impacted and totally destroyed. I've also been talking to Bird Islands and the small island of Ramia off the coast here, who've lost their freshwater source. I know the Prime Minister spoke with Mayor Button of Port of Ask this afternoon, and again continued our support on every federal government department. And as my colleague Minister Fraser was saying, I had reached out from the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans to say, please assure everyone that any infrastructure that Small Craft Harvest is responsible for will be assessed and addressed as soon as possible. We know how important the coastline is for our communities. Look, it's been tough, and it's going to be tough over the coming days, coming weeks, months, and sadly, it's going to be, we're looking at a long time before we get some of this infrastructure replaced. I still have to say, please, please, please listen to the authorities. It's still a state of emergency in some areas. And in the meantime, please stay safe, everyone. I'll be in Port of Ask shortly, and I'll be able to report firsthand on our next presser. Thanks to my colleagues, and thanks to each and everyone on the screen for the diligent work. Friends, the federal government is going to be there to help get us through this.
Merci beaucoup à tous mes collègues. J'aimerais d'abord prendre un instant pour remercier les bénévoles et les premiers répondants. Ces cellules de crise qui font un travail important qui consiste à assurer la sécurité de toute la population. J'ai parlé aux maires, aux préfets de la région qui ont été touchés dans mon comté. Comme j'ai déjà souligné à plusieurs reprises, les Madelinots et les Gaspésiens sont des gens résilients. Cependant, la population reste inquiète des répercussions engendrées par la crise climatique. Des gens ce matin, lorsque j'ai fait des téléphones, me disaient « Diane, on n'a jamais vu la mer aussi déchaînée ». Et j'entendais ce matin aussi un homardier, un pêcheur d'homards des îles de Cap-aux-Meules, M. Cormier, qui disait « J'ose espérer qu'il y ait des gens qui ne croient pas à la crise climatique. Pour moi, là, c'est impossible avec tout ce qui se passe. » On a vu que les dommages aux infrastructures liées aux pêches sont considérables. Et en tant que moteur économique des îles de la Madeleine, les efforts de reconstruction et de réparation seront cruciaux. Il s'apparaît évident que nous devons bâtir des infrastructures capables de faire face à la réalité à laquelle nous vivons maintenant. La phase d'évaluation des dégâts est en cours et bien que le réseau routier aux îles de la Madeleine soit à nouveau accessible, la population est priée de demeurer chez elle, de continuer à faire preuve de prudence, de limiter ses déplacements et surtout de modérer la consommation d'eau potable. Mon équipe de circonscription est sur le terrain et je dois dire que je suis de tout cœur avec tous mes collègues de l'Atlantique. Je remercie aussi tous les Canadiens qui sont à nos côtés. Ensemble, nous sommes toujours plus forts. Merci. Je passerai maintenant la parole à Sean Casey.
Merci, Madame la Ministre. I am going to try to give you a bit of a snapshot of what we're seeing here in Prince Edward Island. The story is quite similar to what you heard from Minister Hutchings and Minister Fraser. It's difficult to give you a full and accurate picture given the challenges we have with connectivity. So the information that I have is largely based on a long run that I did around the community today because it's hard to get anywhere by car. So you have to do it on foot if you're going to go off the main roads. And also based on a call that the Prime Minister convened earlier today, on which the cell service was good enough to hear a report from some of my colleagues. So I'm a bit biased to the level of information by what's in the urban center of Charlottetown, but we heard today from our colleagues that there has been substantial damage incurred in the small craft harbors in Prince Edward Island. In P.E.I, this was largely a wind event. And because it was a wind event, there are an awful lot of trees uprooted, an awful lot of trees that have fallen on power lines. There are power lines down. Last night, practically the entire island had no power. I understand that power is being restored now, but personally and in and around Charlottetown have not yet seen that. This afternoon, for the first time, there was a gas station that had gas and a long lineup in front of it because of that. So reconnecting to power and cell phones is going to be a challenge, and the assistance of the federal government and the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves in that regard is very, very welcome news. So pleased that the Premier made the ask, pleased that the Feds responded in such a timely and affirmative fashion. What I can tell you, though, is today it's a beautiful day. The sun is shining, and everywhere you go around town, what you hear are generators and chainsaws. And what you don't hear is a real sense of despair. We have here in Prince Edward Island great faith in Maritime Electric. The communications that comes from Maritime Electric is always transparent and timely. You get people have a sense of confidence in them. It was heartening to see electric boom trucks from other provinces traveling along the bypass today. So reinforcements have been called in. The sense on the streets is one of shock and awe over the magnitude of the storm, but also a sense of we got this. We knew it was coming. We were ready, and now we got a project on our hands, and we're going to deal with it. That is the overwhelming sense that you get on the streets. So pleased to be part of this conference, and extremely grateful for the work of Ministers Blair and Anand in responding to the request for help from Prince Edward Island. Thanks, everyone.
Merci beaucoup. On va passer aux questions des journalistes, à commencer par la salle, ensuite par Zoom. Si jamais vous avez des questions, s'il vous plaît, veuillez utiliser la fonction main levée pour me dire que vous avez une question sur Zoom. So we'll go to questions, starting with questions in the room. For people on Zoom, please use the raised hand function if you do have a question, and I will unmute you. So we will start with Rafi Bouchkanyan, CBC News.
Bill, do you want to say something, and perhaps Gudie as well? And obviously, Rafi, we were just informed of this as well. And this is, again, a tragic reminder of how these storms can bring personal devastation to families and to communities. So obviously, we're thinking of the family here and the community. But perhaps my colleague, Bill Blair, or Ms. Hutchins would like to add something. Sorry, Bill, those famous words, you're on mute, Bill.
Thanks very much, Dom. And it is very unfortunate, but we've received a word now from the RCMP confirming that the body of the woman that was washed out to sea at Port aux Basques has now been recovered. And it is a reminder, in fact, and how truly dangerous this storm has been. And certainly our thoughts are with the family and with that community. And with that, I think this is a town that Gudie represents and knows very well, and I'll turn it back over to her.
Thanks for that, Bill and Dom. Yes, Port aux Basques is a small town, around 4,000 people. Everybody knows everybody. And I am looking forward to being on the ground there now shortly, and I will be stopping by and passing the condolences of all of us on the screen and all Canadians to her family. It shows the power of the water. And as Sean said, and both Seans know, living in coastal communities, we know what can happen. And tragically, the sea has taken another from us. Thanks so much.
Thanks. And as a follow-up, what specific help to communities such as Port aux Basques, where we know that people have lost their entire houses in some cases, can they rely on support from the federal government?
So perhaps I can...
Yeah, Rafi, go ahead, Don.
No, so Bill, I was just going to begin by saying I have spoken to Premier Fury, as I know my colleagues have as well. He has raised with me yesterday the issue of the destruction to personal property by the storm, the many houses and properties that were damaged. His government will be doing an assessment and obviously will be there to help. There are well-established disaster financial assistance mechanisms that the province will avail itself of. And the Government of Canada will support those families in that community. But perhaps, Bill Blair, you should add some details with respect to that specific issue around some of the property damage that I know the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador has identified.
Yeah, thanks, Dom. And clearly the property damage is excessive. That assessment has begun immediately, and we've been working very closely with all of our provincial partners to make sure that when the dollars are required to facilitate that recovery, we'll be able to move as quickly as possible. But I also wanted to point out that one of the important things that the Red Cross brings to each of our communities and why they're such an important partner to us is the Red Cross will register those people who have been impacted by these things. And we know that the most immediate impact for very many people is the loss of housing and shelter. And so arrangement of interim housing, as well as providing them with, perhaps some funding to assist with their immediate needs with respect to food and supplies. That's something that we work very closely with the Canadian Red Cross. It's why yesterday the Prime Minister announced that we are matching all donations given to the Red Cross. And we've seen other disasters, and most recently in British Columbia during the extensive flooding that they experienced last year, a partnership between the Canadian Red Cross and our government and making sure that the generosity of Canadians flows directly and very effectively to make sure that people have the resources they need in their immediate time of need is critically important, because the recovery is going to take some time. It takes time to rebuild houses, and our first priority right now, of course, is the restoration of power and utilities and to open up those roadways so that we can get those essential supplies to the people that are going to need them. But the Canadian Red Cross and the federal government working together will make sure that the resources are there for people who need it.
Okay. We're going to go with Lee Berthiaume, Canadian Press.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Lee Berthiaume, Canadian Press. I wanted to ask, first of all, if there's any plans for the Prime Minister to travel out east and survey some of the damage.
Perhaps in the meeting of the incident response group with my colleagues this morning, he expressed to us what he expressed, I think, in this room yesterday, his desire, obviously, to see the affected communities to thank the remarkable people that are working on the recovery and cleanup. But it's a function of going at the appropriate moment. The Prime Minister visiting these communities in no way should take away from the first responders and the people who are, in fact, helping with the connectivity issues, restoring power, opening up the roadways. So there'll be an appropriate moment, we hope soon, where it's responsible for him to visit. And I know he's shared with our colleagues in the House of Commons his desire to be there himself and to visit these communities that have been so deeply affected. But it's a matter of choosing the appropriate moment where it's responsible to do so.
And the Nova Scotia Premier earlier today said that the ArriveCan app actually delayed the arrival of assistance from the U.S., that there were some workers from Maine who were trying to come in and that they were unable to get in. Can you comment on that? And, will the ArriveCan app and other travel restrictions be lifted or expire on September 30th?
Bill, do you want to address that, Bill Blair?
Yeah, I've been in regular and hourly contact with officials in Nova Scotia. I'll tell you, it's all hands on deck for every department and ministry of the Canadian government, including CBSA and our border officers, to get the help into Canada, into Nova Scotia as quickly as possible. And any delay was, quite frankly, inconsequential. Everybody's doing everything possible, and the work has continued unabated. We were well prepared and fully anticipated the power disruptions that were taking place. The province of Nova Scotia was already mobilizing significant power crews to get out there and do that work. We're very grateful for the help that has come from Quebec and also from the United States. And of course, we're all doing everything possible to make sure that help arrives as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Okay. We're going to go on Zoom. So starting with Salman Farouki, Globe and Mail.
Hi there. I wanted to ask specifically about some of the coastal damage to individuals' houses. I was talking to the Insurance Bureau of Canada and understand that pretty much all homeowners will be uninsured for the coastal damage from storm surge and salt water. And I wanted to ask if the federal government will be stepping in to support those people if they're uninsured.
And perhaps if I may, I think that's something I can respond to. We have within the federal government an arrangement called the Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement. It's a mechanism whereby we work very closely with the provinces who determine eligible expenses, and then certainly in those uninsured damages to residents and businesses, coastal infrastructure would certainly be qualified for this. And through the provinces, they determine an assessment of what needs to be done, and they make requests for us. We've been working very closely with the provinces, all of them, in our discussions about utilizing the resources available through the Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement. And we have undertaken to them that we'll work very closely and very quickly in order to get the resources into those communities and to help in the recovery as quickly as possible. But this is a well-established procedure and process that we work very closely with the provinces. The provinces have the primary lead, as it should be. They're there and they're on the ground. But I want to assure them and all Canadians they have a good partner in us, and we'll be coming as quickly as is necessary to help people in this time of need.
And perhaps I could just add to what Bill Blair said. It's as I mentioned, Premier Fury has raised this with me directly yesterday. His concern about precisely the potential for significant uninsured losses that these homeowners and these property owners are facing. So I think the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, as Bill said, is very, very much seized with this issue. They'll be doing the evaluations, and they know very well, and I repeated it to the Premier, as I know Bill and Gudie and others have with the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, that the government of Canada, with this long-standing existing arrangement that the provinces know well, will be a reliable partner and will move quickly. And I remember a similar circumstance, I think about 4 years ago, with some severe flooding in and around Fredericton, New Brunswick, Quispamsis, along the St. John River Valley. There were significant losses that families endured as a result of very, very, very massive flooding. And we work with the province of New Brunswick under this arrangement, as Bill Blair said. So we think that the same circumstance will obviously apply in Newfoundland and Labrador, and we'll be happy to work with the province in that regard.
And if I may, Dom, as well, just to be clear, the disaster financial assistance arrangement was designed precisely to deal with those types of catastrophic damage and losses that are not insured or not insurable. And that's why we have that program. It's worked very effectively in other jurisdictions right across the country. We've already engaged very effectively, I think, with all of the provinces who've experienced this damage, and we'll work closely with them to make sure that the resources are available to help in the recovery and rebuild. And it's also really important, and work that we'll also be doing is to make sure that when we do rebuild, it rebuilds with a clear understanding, that we're seeing a greater frequency and severity of these types of storms. And so we want to make sure that rebuild is also, focuses on creating greater resilience for those communities and a safer environment for the people that are potentially impacted by these storms.
And just as a follow-up, I guess I wanted to ask, I know the government for some time now has been working on having some sort of flood insurance program available to all Canadians. And I think it was expected that would be wrapped up within a year. And I guess I'm wondering if an event like this, of this kind of severity, changes anything in that process, if anything, if it just changes anything at all.
Yeah, well, it deepens our resolve to get the job done, because I think we've seen lots of evidence in British Columbia last year, and now that the flood insurance program we're talking about is primarily about overland flood insurance, but the need to ensure that Canadians have access to that important resource, and in order to protect themselves, and so to help us all make better decisions about where we build and how we build, it does I think add a sense of urgency to the work that we have undertaken. We began the work of developing, working with private industry and community partners right across the country. We began that work a number of years ago. It's well along, but we've still got work to do. What we are all, I think, but even greater resolved as a result of seeing some of the damage that has occurred during this event.
Next off is Rachel Gilmore, Global News.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up with a question about the Arrive Can issue. So, Minister Blair, you said that any delay was quite frankly inconsequential, but I just heard from Nova Scotia Power that the time in between the crews being delayed at the border and them arriving on the ground to help Nova Scotians was a few hours. Do you not think a few hours is consequential in a situation like this where so many are without power?
Well, Rachel, simply that's not consistent. I was advised that there was a concern about it, and before any steps could be taken, the matter was resolved. I know everybody, and our officers at CBSA and Public Safety, every federal department working with our provincial partners. We're working to get this done. Everybody understands the urgency of getting those resources quickly into community. There was also, the storm was still ongoing yesterday morning as some of these events were evolving, and so everybody was moving as quickly as reasonably possible, and we're committed to making sure that recovery moves forward apace.
So I'm just trying to clear this up a little bit, because, the Nova Scotia government is saying that they're standing by the fact that this occurred, but you're saying that it was resolved without the need for any intervention. So is that correct? Like, was there absolutely no delay as a result of the Arrive Can app?
I wasn't at the border, Rachel. I can't talk about what interactions may have taken place, but when it was brought to my attention, and like I said, I'm in direct contact with my ministerial counterparts in Nova Scotia, and when the issue was brought to my attention, before we could take any action, it was resolved. Those crews were on their way, and they were out there doing the work that we all so desperately need them to do.
All right, we still have a few minutes with the ministers, so if ever there are any extra questions, please just let me know. Libertion, Canadian Press.
Sure, thank you. Sorry, I've just pulled up my questions here. What What did I write down? One question, obviously, we're talking about, we're seeing more of these incidents. I think that's been recognized. A lot of power outages. And I'm wondering, especially when it comes to mitigation, whether there should be a national plan or policy or regulations around the burying of of power lines. If that's something that can be considered. I don't know whose jurisdiction that necessarily would be, but, is that something the federal government could be looking at, is looking at, anything like that?
Perhaps I could offer a few comments, and if my colleagues want to add something. I'm, in my capacity as infrastructure minister, we're obviously working with provincial and territorial infrastructure departments and governments around disaster mitigation and adaptation, around building more resilient infrastructure. And my conversations with Atlantic premiers in the last few days have focused on the need for community infrastructure. Obviously, I saw in Bram Village, Francophone community schools, health centers. There's a series, and this is true right around Atlantic Canada and Eastern Quebec. There's community infrastructure that has been badly damaged. So we are going to be a very present and very reliable partner with provinces in rebuilding this public community infrastructure in a way that's more resilient and adapts better to, as Bill Blair said, these extreme weather events. As you know, the transmission, the generation and transmission of electricity is properly a provincial jurisdiction. But as it so happens, I'm leading a conversation with my colleagues from Atlantic Canada and the premiers in Atlantic Canada around an Atlantic loop, which could potentially be used as a backbone to bring renewable green energy, largely from the province of Quebec and from Newfoundland and Labrador, but not exclusively, into the grid in Atlantic Canada. So we are engaged with the governments in Atlantic Canada and in Quebec and their utilities in figuring out a way that we can be a partner with them in rebuilding some of this infrastructure that would allow for them to have better access to renewable and greener forms of electricity. So my impression is that this, to come straight to your point, this circumstance in the last few days makes that conversation even more germane. And I would certainly be open to, with provincial utilities, looking at ways the Government of Canada can strengthen the resiliency of that infrastructure. Because as you said, if it's an ice storm we saw in New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island some years ago, or flooding, or an extreme weather event like Fiona, this circumstance is something that's very dangerous. If it happens in January and February, you can imagine the context also in terms of winter conditions. So we would be wide open as a government to figuring out a way that, in a broader conversation about community infrastructure and making it more resilient and adaptive to extreme weather events, that we would look at whether electricity transmission systems can properly be part of that conversation.
Thank you. And a question for Minister Anand. You mentioned that there are, I believe, 100 CAF members ready to respond or are responding in the 4 different provinces. Obviously, the CAF is currently facing a personnel shortage, recruiting crisis, which I've reported on today. I'm curious as to, what assets are available and how stretched the CAF is, whether the personnel shortage is causing problems in terms of, or has the potential to cause problems in responding to this disaster or future disasters.
Okay, thank you so much. Bottom line is that we have the personnel that we need to respond, and we will continue to stand at the ready with this personnel for as long as needed. And just to clarify, it's 100 troops approximately that is available per province. And those troops are in the ground in Nova Scotia at the current time, and they will be on the move very soon regarding Newfoundland and P.E.I. Protecting Canadians is obviously our top priority, and we have shown the ability to do that and the willingness to do that, for example, in the British Columbia floods last year, and then again here and in climate-related disasters, generally speaking. The heart of your question, though, goes to making sure that in the future we have a military with the numbers to sustain regular operations. And that is a fundamentally important question. And we are looking at both the long-term and the short-term ways to increase recruitment. Taking the short term, we have, for example, been maximizing staffing and recruiting centers and training schools and temporarily shortening basic training. In long term, we're continuing our work to build an institution where everyone feels safe, protected, and respected and can reach their full potential. So it's an issue, generally speaking, for the Canadian Armed Forces, but on this matter, in terms of Hurricane Fiona and addressing it, we have the resources we need. We have the capabilities we need. I've outlined those in my remarks, and I'll just say we are all hands on deck, ready and willing to assist. And you can see the work that we're doing now on the ground. Thank you.
One last question, Rafi.
Thanks. A few of you mentioned connectivity issues today, and your colleague at Innovation, Science and Industry the other day tweeted that he requested from telecom giants in Canada to provide assurances that they are doing everything they can to make sure everything's connected as quickly as possible. Have you heard anything from telcos on what they're doing?
So, Rafi, I'll offer a few comments, and Bill Blair or others may want to add something. I do know, as you noted, that our colleague François-Philippe Champagne, well before the storm hit Atlantic Canada and eastern Quebec, had been in touch with these telephone companies, these telcos, these internet service providers, in order to ensure that they're sharing resources as amongst themselves. I know from my own experience at my place in Grand Digue, New Brunswick, we lost that service on Saturday morning. And I know that the particular service providers were very present. I could see their trucks in some parts of eastern New Brunswick yesterday. But François-Philippe Champagne's insistence with the companies was that they work collaboratively with one another, because in some cases, if you think of in Sean Fraser's province or in other provinces, Eastlink, for example, may have a significant presence in some parts of Atlantic Canada, and other internet service providers should be in a position to share resources in terms of helping them restore this, what is now an essential service. But Bill or others may want to add something to that.
Yeah, just a couple of things, if I may, Dom. I can tell you, in the days leading up to this event, there were convened within each of the provincial emergency operations centers, private sector, including the telcos, were invited and attended at the table, and they were part of our planning and our preparation. There was obviously our colleague Minister Champagne was very clear to them our expectation that they would support each other and that they would work collaboratively, and I think there's been lots of evidence of that good work, and I think it will certainly assist in the speeding of recovery. But what I understand as well, because we've inquired about this through the day, is many of the internet and cell disruptions that people are currently experiencing are more directly related to the problems we're having restoring hydro utility in many parts of all of the provinces that have been impacted. And that's as a result of trees being down across those lines, and some very significant challenges. That debris has to be removed. We've got hydro crews out in every jurisdiction working very hard and diligently to restore that power. But my understanding is that the telcos joined us in preparation, have worked very collaboratively together, and again, just like for the rest of us, it's all hands on deck to restore those important services to Canadians as quickly as possible.
And Dominic, if I may, your comments are right, Minister Champagne, and I've been in touch with the telcos and internet service providers, but this is a form of infrastructure too. The connectivity infrastructure as we go forward. We spoke earlier of how we've got to look at how we build bridges and roads and other infrastructure. It's how we build a connectivity infrastructure too. It has got to be weatherproof as we battle these storms more and more in the future.
Thank you very much. This is all the time we have. So thank you for the ministers for your availability. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. This ends the press conference. Merci.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Yeah, stay safe.